And welcome to this week's edition of Movie Spotlight. Joining us in the studio today are our movie critics, Jason Bechervaise. Hello, Jason.
Hello, Andrew.
And Darcy Paquet. Hello, Darcy.
Hi, Andrew.
To start things off, Jason, I noticed you picked a historically and emotionally very heavy film. Movie director Chung Ji-young's My Name, which in Korean is 내 이름은.
That's right.
A film that addresses what is widely referred to as the Jeju April 3 uprising. What can you tell us?
Yeah, sure. So Korea's past, is sadly, full of traumatic events. And, one of the reasons I like Korean cinema is how, often these are captured on screen. This particular event, left a lasting scar on the country. The Jeju massacre, as it's known as, took place between 1947 and 1954. When adding a bit of context here. When the Lee Seung-man government clashed with an armed insurgency. This was launched by the head of the Workers' Party of South Korea. So this, in Jeju, this is the Communist Party. And so the president instigated martial law instigated an eradication campaign that ultimately led to thousands of Jeju citizens being killed. We don't know exactly how many, but it's somewhere between 14,000 and 30,000. So this film, much of it actually takes place in the 1990s, but it does we get to see it kind of through different periods. So it's a two-generational story. We've seen this before in Korean content. When Life Gives You Tangerines, that was a show that I immediately thought of when I saw the synopsis of this film. That incidentally is also partly set in Jeju and also stars the lead actress in this film, Yoon Hae-ran. So the movie's set in 1998, focuses on this mother who, she's still traumatized by the uprising. And so we basically see that how she's struggling through flashbacks. Now, it's not just the Jeju uprising, but we also see other events as well. Her husband fought in the Vietnam War, and also her daughter was affected by the Gwangju uprising and the social democracy movement. So, it is very much a film about history. And meanwhile, actually much of the film, like I say, is set in the present when her son, played by Shim Bin, he's struggling at school. Although initially he seems to be doing very well, a very energetic character. But then there's a new student that comes in that completely upsets the kind of the chemistry within and outside of the classroom. And the film is directed by veteran filmmaker Chung Ji-young. He's one of the few filmmakers who made films where he was working in the industry in the 1970s and 1980s, and he's continuing to make films in this decade, 2020. So he's one of the few I think he's one of the only filmmakers that's able to do that. Although he did have a hiatus. But he made movies like White Badge, also dealing with history. That dealt with the Vietnam War and the horrors of the Vietnam War in ways that, I still remember watching that film in London. It was just a really, really powerful movie. And then there's Unbowed, more recently National Security, and and also The Boys. President Lee Jae-myung attended a screening of this film on Wednesday, and the film premiered at the Berlin Film Festival in February. Giving quite a heavy, overview there.
I know.
I have to add in the, historical context and also, introduce
the armed conflict in Jeju was a rough chapter in Korean history.
Yeah.
It started happening before the Korean War, and then it continued after the Korean War. So it happened for quite a while. It killed a lot of people. And I've heard about all the graphic atrocities that occurred on, I guess, both sides of the conflict there. But frankly, I'm not sure if I can watch all that on film. So I have to ask Jason, will I have to bring a box of tissues?
I was I came out of the screening a bit of a mess.
Okay.
I watch so many films, and I sometimes feel like I get immune to some of the effects that cinema can bring. But I came out very, very moved, angry, infuriated. The film's climax is I'll never forget that. Because actually most of the film is not actually it doesn't actually focus on the event, on this massacre itself. We see that towards the end of the film. It's kind of an emotional climax in a way, and it kind of ripped me apart. And I suppose that's the whole point, because people don't really talk about this massacre. Right. Obviously, Korea is just full of these traumatic events, and maybe it does get forgotten about, right, compared to something like Gwangju, equally horrific as well. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know if Darcy agrees with me when I say it feels like it's told in a very traditional way. I mean, his style of filmmaking it is quite traditional, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. I think it works works really well in a film like Unbowed and National Security, less so with a film like The Boys. But yeah, I think here it was far more effective. Just the way the film is edited, the way it's shot, the way it's acted. And so I can see how, perhaps some critics, won't respond to that. But I quite admired the fact, that he's someone who's so enduring as this filmmaker, brings his skills, and he's 79 years of age, and being able to make a film that completely, I was, like I say, it was a bit of a wreck coming out of the screen, that's something. And I think he wants to bring attention, to this particular horrific and traumatic event. And he's done so, I think, very, very successfully.
You've talked about this a little bit just now, but I think we need to talk about the director himself. You've said that you've seen a lot of his film. Yeah. He's 79. How does My Name compare to his other movies? And do you think, well, I think you've kind of answered this already too, but do you think that he remains passionate about tackling Korea's past?
Absolutely. I made reference to White Badge earlier. Films dealing with history in Korea, certainly in the 1980s and even in the early 1990s, you wouldn't see them through the lens of from a more progressive point of view. I mean, actually, even in the film itself, there's a teacher in the film, and he's basically writing on the blackboard, like these events in Korean history, like the Korean War, and he just misses out the Jeju, and then the student highlights it and says, and he's like, why are you not talking about this? And then the teacher just erupts, in fury. And I think quite often, obviously during the dictatorships of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, there was a tendency not to view these events properly or fairly. And I think he's one of the directors who actually explores Korean history in a way that I think really does examine the complexities and the tragedies of Korea's past. He's one of the first. I mean, In Context, another one, but yeah, and so even though he's been around for a long time, it is told in a very traditional way. But for me, I think he was the right person to tackle this tragedy.
You mentioned earlier that My Name was invited to the Berlin Film Festival. Is this accessible, the film, to international viewers? And do you think that with the growth of Korean content worldwide, fans are very interested in wanting to learn more about Korea's turbulent history that we've been talking about for the past few minutes?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it is very. I mean, it's not an easy watch, but. Yes, I do think it's accessible. It's not a complicated story. It's not throwing lots of details into your face. So, yeah, totally accessible. And I do think that audiences these days, like I see this in my classroom, they want to learn more about, history in Korea's past. And I think there's a correlation with the fact that, Korea does have a dark past, and it's the content itself and the directors and the writers and the artists who have been able to tackle these areas with so much, passion and intellect and creativity. And, I still go back to still go back to the time watching Memories of Murder for the first time in the theatre. Again, it floored me. And it's often through memory, right? This film is also, it's the central protagonist is struggling to recollect what happened. We see that in Memories of Murder in the title, right? That scene at the end of the film where the leading actor, played by Song Kang-ho, looks in horror at the camera as he reflects back on what happened. Peppermint Candy is another example. So, it just reminded me of one of the reasons why I like Korean cinema so much is the experience watching this, even though it was a difficult viewing experience.
Darcy, I think we've kept you waiting long enough, but did you see this film? And it's also screening at the Udine Far East Film Festival, where I'm told that both of you will be attending next month. So Darcy, what are your thoughts?
Yes. Actually, I did the subtitles for the film, and so I've seen it many times.
Okay.
Several different versions. And yeah, I mean, like Jason, I was kind of destroyed by it. I remember kind of typing on my keyboard and crying at the same time, because it is so emotional at the end. And, it's different from other films because, typically a narrative kind of proceeds in a linear sense. And with this one, it's like an onion, and you just keep pulling off layers and getting kind of closer and closer to the middle of it. And, I think it's interesting the way that it portrays trauma because, at the beginning of the film, we aren't even really aware that, this woman is carrying that level of trauma. But, we get clues here and there. And then when she starts doing sessions with her psychiatrist, then memories start coming back to her. And then, so the way that we progress in that is interesting. And, some people might argue that the whole section with her son is not directly related to the plot. The themes overlap somewhat. And yet, I like the relationship between the mother and her son. I think that's an interesting relationship in the film. And, sometimes films talk about historical tragedies, but because they're all set in the past, it kind of doesn't show how those tragedies, continue to affect people in the coming decades. And, this film shows that point quite well.
Okay. But now moving on to our next film, The Voice of Hind Rajab, selected by Darcy. And Darcy, your film appears to have some overlap with Jason's pick in the sense that it's talking about a traumatic past. But this film is talking about something that happened more recently compared to Jeju. It's based on things happening or that have happened in Gaza. Can you tell us about this film?
I don't know what it is about this week that we've had two devastating films released. Yes. So The Voice of Hind Rajab. This is a film by a well-known Tunisian director, Kauthar Ben Hanya. And, she's a very established filmmaker. She's been nominated for the Academy Award several times, back in 2020 for her film The Man Who Sold His Skin. And then she made a documentary that was nominated for the best documentary Oscar in 2024. And, she said that she was planning her next project. And then one day on the internet, she heard these recordings and she just kind of dropped everything and said, I need to make this into a film. And it's actually not the only film. There have been a couple other short films that were made on the same subject. But yeah, and, the film, it's very powerful. Earlier this year, it was one of the nominees for Best International Film at the Oscars, and it's made a big impact, I think, internationally.
I remember monitoring the events in Gaza when the war started in 2023, when I was with the breaking news team at the Washington Post. And it was tough to just read and just listen to all the horrible stuff going on. But again, this week's a little heavy, but what exactly was the incident that inspired this documentary film? And can you tell us more about what happened?
Yes. So, I'm going to spoil what happens in the film. There's a 6-year-old Palestinian girl named Hind Rajab. And, she was fleeing Gaza City with 6 of her family members. They were driving in their car and it came under fire by the Israel Defense Forces. And so most of her family was killed in the initial attack, except for Hind Rajab and then her 15-year-old cousin. And so the cousin called the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, an organization sort of like the Red Cross, and she was asking for help. But then she too was shot as she was talking on the phone to him. So the Red Crescent called back and the small girl answered the phone and, begged them for help, said, please, send help. And, over the next 3 hours, you have tanks circling the car. Mm-hmm. This girl is all alone in the car with these bodies. And then the volunteers on the other end of the line, they keep talking to her. They keep trying to do everything they can to arrange for a safe passage of an ambulance to come and rescue her. Ultimately it does end in tragedy, but the recordings of those phone calls still exist. And so they're the basis for this film.
Which would be tough to listen to, I guess, even on the film. And I can only imagine what it must have been like for the people that made the film. But what framing or angle or point of view did the director decide to employ to present this film?
So the film is shown all from the perspective of the Red Crescent call center. They don't recreate the scenes in Gaza or show that part of the story directly. And the focus is on the volunteers who are manning the phones. So it was shot in Tunisia, actually. And then, the entire film, because it is set in one location, in some ways it does feel like a stage play. Like you could turn this into a stage play, except that, they take the actual voice recordings and they edit them into the film. So everything feels extremely realistic. And, of course, this young girl is in kind of the worst situation you can imagine, but also, the volunteers on the other end of the phone, they're really torn apart by, they're hearing this young girl calling for help and they're trying to do what they can. And yet, they're not able to do anything for her.
Mm-hmm. Which is understandable in the sense that it's got to be, beyond painful. But what's the experience of watching this film like? Is it heavier than what Jason just talked about? Can you just go into your emotions?
It was really intense. I knew this film was coming, and I knew it might be hard to kind of to sit down and actually watch it. I'm glad that I did, because it, even though I knew what happened, and I have also been kind of following what's been happening in Gaza. I think, to see this kind of reenactment gives a different kind of image in your head. Mm-hmm. And, but it is, I won't lie, it is a really tough watch. Because it puts you in the situation and it lets you experience it, as it unfolds. And it is a tough thing. So, some people have criticized it for, taking this real life event and saying like, do we have to go this far? But are
you of the view that you do have to go this far because they want to show the viewers how tough and what a tragedy this was? Is that kind of what you...
I'm glad that I saw it. There may be some people for whom this is just too intense. They might not be able to make it through the film. And I totally understand that. But I think if you can make it through, then I think it is worth watching. It's not simply kind of putting you through this experience, for no good reason.
Jason, I know you didn't watch it yet, but are you kind of looking forward to, if that's a term that we can use, to this film?
I've been following Gaza closely, and I think it's going to destroy me. But I will watch it. Sadly, I've been teaching all this week, for much of this week, so didn't get a chance to catch it in time for this show. But I will, because I think it's important to watch this kind of film.
Okay, Darcy, how has this film been received by the broader film industry?
So it premiered at the Venice Film Festival last year. It won a grand jury prize there. It set a new record for the longest standing ovation, if that means anything. 24 minutes. Also, many Hollywood filmmakers subsequently joined the project as executive producers just to give it more exposure. So Brad Pitt, Joaquin Phoenix, Rooney Mara, Jonathan Glazer, Alfonso Cuarón, Spike Lee, Michael Moore. There's a very long list in the credits. It didn't win the Oscar last month, but it has received a lot of attention. It's, I think, it's had an effect. And now it opened in Korea this week. It is an interesting coincidence that it's opening just not long after President Lee Jae-myung's comments about Israel. So, it's an interesting coincidence.
Which we actually talked about yesterday on here at Korea 24. But that's all for this week's edition of Movie Spotlight. That was Jason Bechervaise. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Darcy Paquet. Thank you.
Thanks.